Okay, good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome back to CYP. It's great to see those of you joining us in the chamber and those who are tuning in online. I know it's a bit late now, but I hope you had a lovely summer break and you're now feeling refreshed and ready to get back to the important work of scrutiny. We do have quite a bit to get through, not just this evening, but for the remainder of this scrutiny year. And so I will keep this introduction short and instead get straight into the agenda. So for tonight, members will be pleased to hear that this agenda has been shaped around the priorities we set out in the work program. And having read the reports, I hope members have come prepared with questions for officers. And so tonight we're going to be looking at our borough's special educational needs and disability strategy, and more specifically, what progress has been made with the written statement of action. I'm sure members are also very much looking forward to getting into the detail of the recent CSF departmental updates and performance indicators, especially where it concerns the priorities we set out in the work program. Thank you, as always, to all of our officers who've been involved in compiling these reports, and especially to Stella for pulling it all together. And thank you also to Cabinet Member Kenny for your attendance tonight to provide us with your verbal update as well. And to close off tonight's agenda, I have an innovation that I would like to float with members, which is aimed at widening the inclusivity of our panel and strengthening our scrutiny function. And so my hope is that when we get to that agenda point, members will agree to take it forward. So with that said, let's get on with it and move on to agenda point 1. Are there any apologies for absence?
Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Chessie Flack, and we have Councillor Robert Page attending as a substitute.
Thank you, Stella, and welcome, Councillor Page, to CYP. We're happy to have you on the panel and are looking forward to your contributions as well. So you're very welcome. Also, just to mention, I've received apologies from Councillor Fraser due to a diary clash, and Director Jane McSherry as well due to personal matters. But her deputy is here and is more than capable of filling in for her agenda items. Next, we'll move on to the minutes from the previous meetings. Are we in agreement that they're an accurate reflection of that meeting? Oh, yes, Councillor MacArthur. That is something that I could speak to Stella about following this meeting. And if it is possible, then I'll update members. And if not, then we can get back to members with when it will be included in a scrutiny meeting. You're very welcome. Okay, so we'll now move on to any declarations of interest. No? Okay, now we're on to departmental updates. So I will hand over to Elizabeth to introduce this agenda item before we then move to questions.
Thank you, Councillor Carissa. So I shall introduce the first part of this report, and then I'll hand over to my colleagues Diraj and Richard for their parts as well. The first part of this report gives you an overview of the busy time that we have had over the summer and to confirm how Children's Schools and Families supported the emergency response to the Galpins Road incident, and there were officers involved and continue to be officers involved in supporting families who have been disrupted and some of whom, as you know, remain out of their homes. The education part of this report then goes on to talk about special educational needs and disabilities and around a consultation around the Ofsted inspection framework for special educational needs and disabilities. Ofsted have consulted on that. We submitted a response. The new inspection framework is expected to start in January. But we are expecting a re-inspection associated with our written statement of action before then. And there's a later item on the agenda about that. The next part of the report about education talks about EHCPs, our education, health and care plans for young people, highlighting that we had 234 requests for assessment. Of those, 202 went forward to assessment and 116 EHCPs were issued, leading to a total of 2,481 EHCPs in the timescale. There is also a section there around the expansion of our SEND provision. So since schools restarted in September, the new provision at Watley campus, which is part of Melrose, opened for 40 children. When it's full, there will be 80 children attending there. And then I think as we have trailed in this forum before, there has been a new additionally resourced provision as well, opening Cranmer School this September, and the ARPs, the additionally resourced provisions in West Wimbledon and Hatfield, have also been expanded. There is also then a section on support and outcomes for our children with English as an additional language. And then an overview of the activity of some of the activity of this schools partnership, which is called Attain, over the past year. And we highlight there our race equality conferences, which took place, as I said, over the past academic year, and our reading fluency project, which has achieved great success in Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, and where we are looking forward to in the future our Attain priorities for this coming year includes rolling out that reading fluency project into secondary and also a peer review programme. So at that point, I will hand over, if that's okay, to Diraj to talk about the children's social care aspects.
Thank you. So members will be aware at the last scrutiny panel, we provided an update on the Ofsted inspection that had taken place early in the year in February and March. So in the report, we've highlighted and captured the actions that have taken place since then. So in August, we needed to submit an action plan to Ofsted. As members will recall, Ofsted regarded children's social care and early help as outstanding in Merton, but there were two areas that they asked us to look at. One was around some children that come into care out of hours. And this is a service that's hosted by Sutton for us, as well as a number of other local authorities in the Southwest region. And the other area was around a flexible needs-led housing offer for children who leave care. We've captured that briefly in the report, and we've submitted alongside that in the appendix the actual action plan that hopefully members will see highlights the actions that we've taken up until this point. but also those that are going to carry on up until March of 2023, which is when we're hoping to have concluded a number of those actions. But there will be ongoing work, particularly around the housing needs-led offer, that will carry on beyond that point as well. The second part of the children's social care update relates to disproportionality and youth crime. So members will be aware that a youth crime prevention exec board is run by and overseen through the Youth Justice Department. That's attended through various offices within Merton Council, but also partner agencies, including our police. This group has this board has effectively run a disproportionality subgroup, and that subgroup looked at two key aspects, are now looking at two key aspects of disproportionality at the moment. The first one relates to no comment interviews, and we were keen to understand whether that was a feature that existed for Merton. Now, as you're aware, the Southwest London BCU, the Police Command Unit, covers a number of local authorities in the region, but they did review some of their data, and they did identify that young black people were more likely to provide no comment interviews. So some actions have been devised as part of that, and one of those actions relate to reviewing court processes, so that if they did give no comment interviews in court to the police, if they then provided comments in court, it would be passed back to the police to consider whether an out-of-court arrangement could be made for them. And the second part of the work that the disproportionality group is undertaking is around stop and search. And this relates to, as we know, young people in trust in our police force and struggling to feel strong enough to and respond to some of those stop and search incidents that take place, and considering and their worries around disproportionality around that. So we ran a really successful workshop, which included young people as well as senior police officers, which you know, the reporting back has highlighted some really great learning and reverse mentoring that young people gave to senior police officers. That's been captured as well in the appendix as a graphic minute of those workshops. So that's all from me. I'll pass over to Richard.
Thank you, Diraj. Members may recall in the departmental update at your last meeting, we provided a brief update on the Dedicated Schools Grant Safety Valve programme. We thought this time it wanted a little bit more detail than we provided last time. So this time it's contained in Appendix 1. In Appendix 1, we give a very brief overview of the history of it. And when I read it back, I don't think it quite does justice to the 6 months of hard work and hard negotiation with Department for Education to get to the point of agreement with them, and Secretary of State sign off in March 22, and then the payment of the first instalment of 11.6 million. It was, I promise you, a very detailed and very hard piece of work and some very hard negotiation to get to there. We are now not quite 6 months into the 5-year plan. I think it's really important to note it is a 5-year plan, and that's what was agreed with DfE, and that is their expectation. They don't expect us to be in balance until year 5 of that plan, because they recognise the difficulty of the challenge of rebalancing the system whilst continuing to meet children and young people's needs. And also, we are not necessarily operating in the most favourable of circumstances post-COVID, and of course the economic circumstances. However, we are making very good headway. We submitted our second monitoring report to DfE on the 17th of September, and that was reported as at the end of August. And we call them quarterly reports, but the first one was only 2 months and the second one was 3 months. Don't know what it says about maths in DfE, don't mean it that. But so that report then sets out where we've got to at that point of 30th of August. And just pick out a few key headlines. Part of the council's commitment to that programme is it's invested significant sums of money, significant resources in SEN, and particularly capacity to support schools, supporting children in mainstream, as well as capacity for those who need more intensive support. So the report sets out the additional staff the council's put in place, and it also sets out the additional capacity in borough, in the ARPS and in the Watley Annex, which provides 80 new special school places, of which, as at the beginning of term, 40 had been filled. So those 40 have made a real difference in terms of educating those children in borough, but also it had a huge financial impact. Those 40 places have reduced cost by £1.1 million alone. So it's very significant. And we have capacity to meet the needs of other children in Whatley. However, one of the fundamental reasons we have difficulties in Merton around the DSG is historically we've had a low level of special school provision. We have some really excellent special schools. We just don't have enough places to meet the needs of the population. So one of the asks we gave back to DfE is we need another special school. Initially, we asked for 150 places. There are 40 additional places prospectively just over the border in Sutton, provided for by them in another school. So in the next week or so, we'll be submitting an application for a special free school linked to the Safety Valve programme to be in borough. There's a lot of work to do that, but again, it's a very significant part of our programme that we bring in and develop with DfE more special school places so children don't have to go out of borough. We utilise out of borough independent sector schools far more than other places, and as well as being a bad outcome for many children given the distances involved, it's also hugely expensive compared to in borough mainstream provision or free school provision. So that's a really important part of our plan. We've made good progress. So as at the end of August, the in-year deficit is £3 million improved on the start of the year, which is a huge move in just 5 months. There is a long way to go. So we're 6 months into a 5-year programme, and the really key part is we've got to maintain momentum. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that very thorough overview. There were quite a lot of significant updates in that report, and I'm sure that members are itching to ask questions about any area within that departmental update. And so similar to how I did it at the last meeting, we'll take questions in threes, starting off with our members online and then moving to the chamber. So are there any members online that have any questions? No? Okay, we'll move on to members in the chamber, starting with Councillor Hall. Yes, your microphone isn't on.
Can I just ask how you intend to slow the growth of EHCPs? Are you perhaps talking about suppressing in some ways the needs of children in the borough who are in need of special help at schools?
And if I may just add to Councillor Hall's question, because when I was going through the report as well, I noticed that in the figures you gave, 32 requests were denied for a EHCP needs assessment. And I'm just curious as to what the criteria was to deny those 32 people, 32 children an assessment. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Page.
Yes, I had a question on the disproportionality section. Namely, could you give a bit more detail on what the dynamic is that causes no comment at interview? In the second section, you mentioned stop and search, as a trust issue, but I wanted to question, is the no comment at interview, is sort of trust in the police the established cause of that, or is that sort of speculative, or is it sort of established in sort of research? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take the first 2 questions, if I may, and then I'll come to Diraj. Councillor Hall, no, we're not suppressing. This is about application of our thresholds, which have not changed. This is about looking at the evidence that is being presented by schools to ensure that everything that has been done needs to have been done to be able to support the child in school. And I think so therefore linked, Councillor Kawisa, to your question around on what basis really were those requests for an EHC needs assessment denied. What we would be doing, I mean, obviously I can't comment individually on those cases, but what we would be doing is looking to see how a child's needs can be best met within the school. And if a child needs an EHCP, or it looks as if they will, then we will take it through to a needs assessment. But if it looks as if the needs can actually be met within what would be termed the ordinarily available resources that the school has, including some of the notional £6,000 SEND funding a school has, then we would be saying that actually we would not think that an EHCNA would be appropriate. But to come again, Councillor Hall, not suppressing. This is about looking at the evidence rigorously and fairly. We absolutely want to make sure that every child that does need an EHCP and needs that support and the additional resources that come with it has access to that.
Okay, I'll open up to a second round of questions if there are any. Oh, sorry. Go for it, Diraj.
Thank you. Just going back to the question with regards to disproportionality. So the question was about stop and search. There's absolute correlation between stop and search and no comment interviews, and that's both in research, but also what we found from the surveys we did with young people in the area. So the feedback they'd given us was that actually they don't have the trust, and actually they will hold back on providing evidence or information and interviews, and that relates to the lack of trust with the police. And later on, that tends to the consequence of that tends to be they're more likely to be charged for an offence and then be prosecuted for an offence, which is why the courts have agreed to introduce the process of, if they did change their no comment view to providing comments during the court process, that they would be given the opportunity for that to be referred back to the police for consideration. So there is a relationship there, and it's more than speculation, but we're learning. And I think as we're learning more, and we're identifying new ways to respond to those things.
Of course you can.
I was just going to ask, are there any other, alongside stop and search then, are there any other sort of, I don't know what the word, police activities or police behaviours that are driving the same sort of loss of trust? Is it sort of just stop and search, or is there sort of another series of things that you're also looking at?
I might need to come back to you, council members. I mean, there are going to be several things that affect and drive the relationships between young people and the police. There's as the graphic at the end, which was effectively the minutes being published in a graphical format, indicate there are concerns around behaviours that have been perceived as racist towards young Black people. There are behaviours that have been considered to be aggressive towards them, which affect their trust and their feeling to be able to respond in a positive way. And generally, it's been felt that there's evidence of disproportionate behaviour from the police, but also the reaction from the young people is adding to the disproportionality as well, although that can't be used as a reason for it. So there are several factors that have influenced both that relationship, absolutely. And members may be aware of a case in the north of London regarding a young Black female that was strip searched in a school, referred commonly to as Child Q. Again, that was considered as a disproportionate use of power, and there was consideration of adultification, where young people are considered to be older because they are from a minoritized ethnic group than anybody else, because they're considered to be streetwise, and actually that's a form of disproportionate behavior, that's a form of racism, because you're not affording them the same opportunities as you would, say, a white British young person. So there are several factors that would influence.
Thank you for those responses. I'll now open it up to a second round of questions, starting off with Councillor Hall. Oh,
Yeah, sorry. Could I have a quick follow-up to my question, which is that one of the actions under the safety valve plan is to slow the growth of EHCPs. How can you do that? It's very difficult to predict how many young children in the borough are going to, in the future, have a need for them. And yet it's an action that you need to take to slow the growth of EHCPs. I'm just wondering how you can balance that.
and just off the back of that question as well, because I had a few questions of my own regarding these EHCP plans. So the figures also showed that the EHCPs are less this year than they were last year, and also less than they were in 2020. And so I just wanted a bit more clarity on why that is the case, like why we're getting less EHCP plans. Because just to add to that, and this is anecdotal, the school where I'm a governor, the head teacher, Hazelmere Primary School, the head teacher there is always flagging the needs of some of her students requiring EHCP plans, but not being able to get them an assessment, or even though she feels that they need those plans. And so, yeah, I would like to ask that follow-up question with that in mind as well.
Right, I will start off and I may hand over to Richard for some additional detail. So addressing your point first, Councillor Hall, and I think it will hopefully also maybe address part of what you were saying as well, Councillor Kwisa. An important part of the strategy that we have created to address those actions that the DFE have asked us to undertake has been around working with schools to skill them up even further, because we have good inclusive schools, but further skill up leaders, teachers, support staff in our schools to understand what should be and could be available as part of this ordinarily available offer. So what as part of quality first teaching needs to be available in schools. Now there is still a variation in what our schools across the borough are able to offer as part of ordinarily available, and so it's skilling up. It's also sort of bringing up and sharing that good practice, so the quality of that ordinarily available is more consistently available in all of our schools. One of the challenges that we face is that the national curriculum at the moment very much views that children should be moving through the curriculum at a universal pace year by year. And obviously we want as few children to fall behind as possible. But one of the possibly unintended consequences of that is that the way that teachers have been encouraged to plan is that they pitch their teaching at the majority of, or the children who are working at age-related expectations or above. And what has been happening to support children who are not working at age-related expectations is not strong enough. It's a bit of an art which is sort of lost, has been lost in our schools, because it was a much more common practice up until about 10 years ago. So what we want to do with our schools is to enable class teachers in the first instance to be really that supporting children in the classroom with their quality first teaching, enabling them, supporting them to have their needs met. And so it comes back to the training offer, the skills development that we have for all the staff in our schools. And as that further develops, as I said, as the consistency develops, then we should be able to see, you know, that children's needs can be met at that ordinarily available stage. So I think long-winded answer, and apologies for that. But it's a very nuanced picture, and we are not blind, because the implication of an action like what we've got in the safety valve is we're just going to turn the tap off. And that is a clear message that we are not giving, we're saying to schools, we're not turning it off the tap. We need to understand that you are doing everything that you can, and we will support you to do that. But where those plans are needed, and we're taking that professional advice, then those plans will go through. Richard, did you want to?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Just to emphasize 2 points. Firstly, it was very clearly DfE's view of Merton that we were accepting too many referrals to assessment, and too many of those assessments were converting into EHCPs compared to other local authorities in our peer group. And therefore, we had a rate of growth that was not related to need, but was related to need and practice. So part of the challenge is around not changing our thresholds, but applying our thresholds appropriately and consistently. But also, as Elizabeth said, it's about the wider SEND support offer outside of EHCPs, and were we doing enough? And so a lot of our investment of capacity is in that support for schools around pre-HCP support. So it's not about saying the child doesn't need support, it's about what is the best way. And their view of us was that we were going too quickly into HCPs, not considering other options first before that. And that then resulting in it and financial issues. In terms of the issues of the number going down, Councillor, Chair, there's a number of factors in that. I mean, there will always be new EHCPs coming through. There will be growth. I'm not expecting numbers to stay steady. The reality, if you look at what's coming through post-COVID particularly, but what we have done was fallen behind in our reviews, and we had a number of plans that are really amongst younger people, sort of 18 to 25, where there wasn't much happening for them that actually moved on in their life, but we hadn't reviewed them, so therefore we hadn't closed their plans. We caught up on our reviews and closed some of their plans. So it slightly flatters us because because our numbers have come down slightly, but actually it was an important part of it, and reviews are a very important part of the process. We're back up to that. So the numbers have really, the difference is marginal, it's really stabilized compared to the start of the year. However, obviously September, start of the new school year, will be an important time when new referrals will come through. Don't expect that position to hold as we move through. When we come back to report on the third quarter, I expect there'll be some movement upwards on that. But there is growth. It's about whether the rate of growth really matches need as opposed to practice, hopefully.
Okay. Thank you for those responses to our follow-up questions. Councillor MacArthur.
Thank you. I've just got a question about the Attain partnership, which seems really interesting. I just wondered how the decisions are made as to what projects are going to be funded in the future. You've put a few down in the 2022-23. I'd just be interested to know how those decisions are made.
And can I also ask a question about the Attain partnership as well? Clearly, we're on the same wavelength, even though we haven't coordinated these questions. So I attended the Race Equality in Education conference, which was a very good conference, very well attended by schools and also some students who delivered some fantastic presentations on how they're leading on race equality initiatives in their schools. Particular shout out to the student ambassadors at Rickard's Lodge. But my question is around the next sort of Race Equality in Education conference and a suggestion that was put in the report around merging that with the Young People Race Equality Conference and having a forum where you're combining the voices of young people with school leaders as well. And so those two in concert can implement some of their ideas working in partnership rather than separately. Could you speak on that too, please? And Councillor Butcher.
I just wanted to briefly come back to no comment answers. I was just wondering what sort of role gang mentality is playing into no comment answers. I came out of education in the last 8 years, but my experience at school was very much with peers of mine who had fallen into gangs, and whether through a sense of misplaced loyalty or a sense of fear, often when they were confronted by the police, it would be a case of no comment answers, no cooperation whatsoever. I think part of what you said, it does stem from an anti-establishment, anti-police feeling. But yeah, just what sort of role is gang mentality playing into it?
So to respond to the questions about Attain, so the Attain partnership is based on the school cluster structure. All the secondary schools are in one cluster, special schools are in another cluster, and then the primary schools, there are 5 clusters, I would want to say. There are representatives from each of the cluster in the board meetings. Issues from the clusters are brought to the board meetings. The board also horizon scans what's happening on a national, in the national sphere. Also, what are the priorities that are coming up locally? What does our Merton local authority of the whole, all schools together, the achievement data tell us? Where do we need to take action? And it's on the basis of that the priorities are agreed. The focus on race equality has been with us now for a couple of years, and actually we're into our 3rd year of focusing on that and prioritising resources towards that. And other things that we've looked at in the past have included the well-being of leaders post-COVID. That was a really very important one. Recruitment and retention of staff, for example, as well as your more traditional school improvement priorities where peer reviews happen for that sort of thing. In terms of the Race Equality Conference, Chair, so we just had our most recent meeting of the board earlier this week, and it was early discussion started about how we're going to be able to take that forward. That particular recommendation that we tried to combine young person and staff conference. Being an annual conference, we'll be looking to do something about that probably in the summer of 2023, a year after the previous conference.
Brilliant. And Councillor Butcher's question.
Thank you. So in short, I think you summarised that really well, Councillor Butcher. So gang mentality, gang influence does have play a part in no comment interviews. The piece of work that the disproportionality subgroup looked at was primarily the relationship between police and young people and the issues of trust there. Although I would suggest that actually if trust was strong in the way in which police might handle somebody who's in fear of repercussions if they were to then provide evidence, for instance, that would play a part in that as well. So you're absolutely right. So in short, I would agree with you. What we do have is we've got some training that's available for officers, both within the council but also police, which look at how we support and talk to young people about the difference between, you know, providing evidence to help protect others within their peer groups versus what they might perceive to be snitching or, you know, giving or some of the other words that are used by some of their peer groups as well. So in short, I would agree with you. Yes, there is a correlation between gang involvement, but the disproportionality group looks specifically at the relationship between police and young people.
Thank you. But before we move on to the next questions, I just want to apologise to Councillor Pearce, because you were just outside my eye line, and so I couldn't see that your hand was raised. But if you still like to ask your question, please do. And apologies for missing your hand.
Thank you. I did want to ask too, but mostly they've been answered by Elizabeth. But looking at the summary at 19 adds another question. anybody who thinks the government love us, that's why they're giving us £28 million, is deluding themselves. What we have to do, as I see it, is have a balanced budget at the end of 5 years. We've got a higher percentage, I think it's 45% of children coming into the schools with English as a second language or even a third language. We've also got more children taking 30 hours at the beginning of their school lives in the nursery. Are we confident that the sort of the projections with all those extra children, all that extra responsibility, although it appears from what Usama said, I asked about the 78 children and 120, is that because the regulations have been tightened, or are we keeping the same degree of diligence with it, but there are going to be more of them because there is going to be more call, which means it's going to be harder to, over the years, to balance that budget? I know that's a maybe question, but.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. And Councillor Howard, did you have a question as well?
I did, thank you. I was just circling back to disproportionality. I'm just wondering to what extent because we talk about disproportionate stop and search on young Black people, and I'm wondering how much of this is down to kind of cross-cultural misreads, because body language is, we're a multicultural society and we embrace that. But I know some cultures, for instance, to look at an authority figure directly in the eye is considered quite disrespectful. And therefore it's natural to be respectful and to look away and to look down. And that can be misread as being shifty behavior, frankly. And there are other examples of that. And I'm just wondering to what extent the police, which is predominantly still white, get some kind of training to understand how other cultures behave and what that behavior means, rather than interpreting it through their own cultural lens. I'm just wondering.
Okay, it doesn't look like there's a third question, and so I'll hand over. Oh, there is one. No, that's all right. Go for it, Councillor.
It comes back to Councillor Butcher's question and also the out of hours issue that had come up previously. I think it's been raised by youth workers previously. Has any thought been given to a safe house outside the borough, so children coming into care out of hours, possibly due to involvement with gangs, can be taken out of the borough and assessed in a safe house? Has that ever been given any thought? Thank you.
Thank you. I can answer Councillor Pearce's question. So briefly, we've not changed our thresholds, as Elizabeth has stated. We've just applied them in the way more consistently and more appropriately than we did. But also, I think you make a very fair point. We put our final submission to bed the week before Christmas in 2021. And it was based at a point in time set of data. For example, we were told to use 2% inflation in our assumptions. Not looking very clever at the moment. So, but we are very clear. We will deliver the plan and the actions and deliver the impacts those actions can legitimately have. However, we are not steady state. Inflation, need, all changes, and our job is to capture that and to feed back to DfE and say, actually, the world is not the same. Therefore, the need is not the same. Therefore, the resources are not the same. We have delivered what we said. We've already had quite a big chunk of the 28 million. Give us the rest of it, because we've met our part of the bargain. The world has moved on. You need to reflect that. We're quite clear in that. And when we went into this negotiation, we were quite clear. 5-year program is risk, which is why we asked for a substantial amount up front. 11.6 million. We were slightly surprised we got it. But actually, good on Caroline for asking for it, because actually means we've banked a big chunk already, another 875 banked. And as we go along, keep making progress, we keep banking that money. But we will keep pushing back and saying the world is not standing still. Inflation is 10%. The needs are coming through post-COVID. We're only just starting to understand some of those. And we have to push back, not just ourselves, the other safety valve authorities, and indeed the rest of the country. The need in the world of SEND is growing, not shrinking.
And just so I'll pick up the two questions. The first one was about cross-cultural misreads and police training. Councillor, I have to profess, I don't know the depths of the training that the police undergo around diversity and inclusion, but what my limited personal knowledge does tell me is that they do receive some specific training. The disproportionality subgroup and the work that we did through reverse mentoring was very much about what those young people and their experiences meant, and it was important that they could share their stories and their experiences and what it meant for them with the police, so that they could really put themselves in the shoes as far as possible and empathize with those young people. But you're absolutely right. There are going to be generational trauma issues for a lot of minoritized ethnic groups in this country who are affected and will react in a certain way with authority, which then may be misread. You're absolutely right. Moving to the other question about safe houses outside, we don't necessarily refer to them as safe houses, but you're absolutely right. If there was a young person who was immediately at risk within the borough, and keeping them within the borough would continue to cause likelihood of harm to them, we would be working very closely, and we do work very closely with our police colleagues to look at where else is safe enough for them. And sometimes it's not even just outside the borough. Sometimes it has to be much further away. We wouldn't refer to them necessarily as safe houses, but we would look at foster placements and in some situations, residential placements out of borough if keeping them within the borough would remain, keep them unsafe.
Thank you. Are there any last minute questions? Okay, we've got a couple. We'll start off with Councillor Hall and then Councillor Kirby.
It's a very, very quick question. I just wondered what the timescale was for informing parents of children whose EHCPs are coming to an end because they've left full-time education or training. What's the timeline for letting them know, getting in contact with them? I only ask because my son is in that situation and we've not heard anything.
Councillor Kirby, your question.
Yeah, my question's about young children in reception who are already diagnosed with a significant issue, who then come into primary school without an EHCP and are expected to have that provided within that school. I would like to know what the borough are doing to set a system up that means that the schools don't have to deal with that, because this is where the significant needs take up an enormous amount of people's time, and there will be no support for that particular child. Is there going to be some kind of triage, a separate service where these children are dealt with and fast-tracked so that they go, if they are likely to be going into special, they go straight into special school and don't have to go into mainstream school and put that pressure on the teams there?
So thank you, councillors. In terms of the timescale for informing parents, I would have to come back to you on that, Councillor Hall, because I'm not sure. And we would only be ceasing where that's appropriate to cease. Again, I think, as you say, when education is no longer happening. Councillor Kirby, in terms of children coming into reception, we do so. A large number of children don't just come into the education system in reception, so they will have been in some kind of preschool provision, and indeed in some of the private, voluntary and independent nurseries, or indeed school nursery classes. Children with significant needs, generally, the vast majority will come to our attention really quite early on, preschool. And our portage team will be out there supporting the parents and, where appropriate, enabling those children to access preschool provision and moving forward with an EHCP if that is appropriate. We also have a team of officers, inclusion officers, who are dedicated to working within our PVIs, our private, voluntary and independent nurseries and our nursery classes to support the professionals, the key workers, the teachers in those provisions to develop the inclusive practice for those children, and again to help navigate the world of EHCPs should that be necessary. So very much hope that certainly those, as I said, the Portage team picking up those with the biggest level of the greatest level of need, children who have maybe who haven't come to the Portage team's attention, being supported through their preschool provision as well. There are some children who do then go into reception classes where the need is great. There we are very much looking that records between sort of preschool and reception classes are well handed on, so that there is a good record of the plan, do, review, assess, review process has taken place. That is the process which we ask schools to go through to put in place interventions and to establish the impact of those, and if on the back of those the child needs an EHCP, that the application can go in. So there are teams in place. Record keeping is important as well, and the transfer of those records. I would also say, you know, when children do come into reception, we are looking at those children on an individual basis as the applications for EHC needs assessment come through.
So are they relying on educational psychology? What are they relying on for them to fast track their way through?
So there's professional advice that they could be seeking from educational psychologists. There is for children under 5, speech and language therapy assessments, which come from the health service actually for the under 5s. There are, as I said, the inclusion advisors who work with the schools will also be supporting that process there. But we are, just to come back to one of the original points I made in an earlier question, what we need is, I talked particularly in the context of schools there, but it's not just schools, it's our preschool provision, helping them to feel supported in terms of the practice that their quality first provision, let's not just call it teaching, but the first provision is as strong as it needs to be. And you know, there are interventions that can be put in place by teachers, by key workers in preschool provision in schools.
I'm not going to argue about this, but what I would say is educational psychology time is priceless.
Yeah.
And if you've got a queue of children that you want to be seen by the EP, and then you've got a child coming in with significant needs, they jump to the first of the queue and everybody else drops down it. And, you know, it is a worry. For me, it's about how do we fast track these children without actually taking, finding those resources. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that's going on at Scoot here. And can I say just generally, well done to all the good work that you've been doing, because quite frankly, reading through the report's fantastic. You know, and that we are scrutinizing, but we should also be saying good things to you as well. But that for me, I think that is really quite worrying. The need to fast track, and I hope that we're doing as much as we can for schools, because they are dreadfully hard pressed, really, in terms of BP time.
And that is a good note to end on, Councillor Kerr, because I also agree, whilst this is about scrutinizing practices, we should also be highlighting good practices as well, so that they do continue. And on that note, as I was reading through the report, which was a very good report for Scrutiny, so I'm looking forward to future reports reflecting how useful this one was. So some of the things I picked out that I think are worth raising is the 20 weeks it takes to complete an education, health and care needs assessment. The fact that we're at 77% in terms of completing those assessments, which is above, you know, the 60% national average, is really good progress. And also looking at, we spoke about students with education, with English as an additional language, and the progress they make at the end of primary as well, it is looking really, really positive. And when talking about the disproportionality group and the work that's gone into that and working collaboratively with young people and getting their input as well, I think is the right way to address an issue as sensitive as that. And I'm glad that we're looking at the causes of the results we're getting in these courts and trying to address those root causes. And so just to echo Councillor Kirby, we're well done in that respect. And we'll continue to monitor things like the safety valve and that 5-year plan. Bless you, Councillor Hayes. And that plan as well to make sure that we're sticking to that schedule. So before we move on to the next agenda point, I'm aware that Diraj has got to attend to a personal matter. And so if you would like to excuse yourself, that is absolutely fine. Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. Is that the performance monitoring report? All right. All right, then we'll move on to the performance monitoring report next. And before we get into the meat of that, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome Maisie to CYP and also to congratulate her on her new job as well. You're very welcome, and I'm sure from what you've heard tonight, the panel do challenge, but they're also fair in their questions as well. And so I'm sure it's going to be great. So with that, I'll hand over to you to give us a quick overview and then open it up to questions from members.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so this is a regular performance item that comes to scrutiny to members. So you'll see in the agenda pack that you've got a performance index paper, which is a series of performance indicators for Children's Schools and Families Department. These are evaluated against a target. So you have a target on the left-hand side, and then you have a VAG rating and the actual figure on the right. So the data is at July 2022. And then accompanying the performance indicators, you have a exceptions report, which details some commentary for all of those performance indicators that are VAG rated as red and amber. So this provides a little bit of commentary just to provide you with a bit of commentary and reassurance about what we're doing in relation to those indicators where we're not on target. So I won't propose going through each of the sort of items in detail in the exceptions report. I did just want to highlight that there's a couple of indicators, so number 17 and 18 on the performance index, which are VAG rated on here as green, but I have seen that they are actually, there's been a slight dip in performance. And I just wanted to reassure members that we are aware of those. So those 17 and 18, there has been a recent dip and we're keeping an eye on those. So that 17 is around stability of placements for looked after children, and 18 is around the percentage of looked after children in foster placements who are placed with in-house foster carers. So that's, if that's okay as a sort of broad overview, then I'm happy to take any questions on the performance indicators.
Thank you. Any questions on the performance indicators? I'll start by checking if there's any questions online before I go to the chamber. No? Okay. Any questions in the chamber? Councillor Page and Councillor MacArthur afterwards.
Yeah, I just want to start on measure 9, which is the percent of children that became the subject of a child protection plan for the second or subsequent time. Didn't really understand the narrative you gave in the paper, but also had a question about how will this sort of be brought back into target. I think the bit in the narrative is this is mainly due to a large sibling group but the numbers seem to look, going from 14 to 27 made that look slightly sort of unrealistic. There would just be a single sort of large sibling group, but then also, how would it be brought back into target?
Oh, hi. Mine's regarding number 7, the percentage of reviews completed within timescale. I was interested in the fact that there was a dip this year and there was also a dip last year at the same time. And I was just wondering, did you look into why there was a dip last year? And have you obviously looked into why there is a dip why there is a trend for a dip this year? Do you know why that is in terms of the percentage achieved?
And if I may ask the third question, the indicators that I'm particularly concerned about are 27 and 28 around surplus places. And my question is essentially, is it not inevitable that schools are just going to have to be asked to reduce capacity because the surplus of what currently is concerning in primary schools and not secondaries, that's gonna progress on to secondary, and unless we're attracting children from outside the borough, I don't see how that indicator is going to be resolved without asking schools to reduce capacity. So is that the inevitable direction we're heading in? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. On the first question around indicator 9, so yes, we have indicated in the narrative that it's largely due to a large sibling group, which has increased the percentage. So the numbers that are referred to there are the numbers by month, but you'll see that the increase there is so up to 24% in June and July. I think for the for the first 2 questions, I'll probably defer to Diraj to add some further comments around practice, and the third question, I think, to Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So with regards to indicator 9, which is percentage of children who became subject of a child protection plan for the second or subsequent time, it is correct that we've had 2 families with large sibling groups that have aided to that number. And actually, because numbers of children subject to child protection plans in Merton are relatively low, in the last count it was under 100, actually that small sibling group can make a big difference if they come back as a repeat. Having said that, that's not the only reason. We have seen an increase in need, an increase in risk. We have seen an increase in cases where we are entering into public law outline, where we are seeking legal advice. This is something that we are monitoring closely, and as part of our QA quality assurance activity, that is very much part of what we're trying to understand and learn from. Part of that relates to higher level of need that we're identifying. Some of that's related to post-COVID, as services are starting to get back more into interventions into families' lives. We're starting to unpick more, we're starting to understand more, we're starting to see more complexities, and that's really leading to increased scrutiny from us in those families' lives. What I'm also interested in understanding is what did we do last time, and did that not make have the desired effect, and what can we learn from that? So our quality assurance is very much looking at learning from last time and doing better this time. So just moving on to the second question, which relates to child protection reviews. Again, these are very small numbers, and small numbers can affect quite significant percentage dips very quickly. Our performance remains fairly strong, but you're absolutely right. And it appears that in July, August time, some of those reviews timescales do fall out. Some of that relates to school holidays, and we want to make sure that our child protection plans are reviewed in a quorate fashion. So we need to ensure all the significant partnership agencies are involved. And sometimes during holiday season, that can be problematic, but also availability of families if they've gone away on holiday. and we prefer not to hold reviews if not all key members of the child protection plan aren't able to attend.
And then if I could pick up the Chair's questions around indicators 27 and 28, which are around surplus places. I think the first thing to say is just to clarify. So they're red for different reasons. So the reception places are red because we have got 11.6% vacancy rate, as opposed to in comparison to what we're calling a target of 5 to 10%. So in other words, we've got greater space in primary schools, and in secondary schools at 3.2%. That's under the 5 to 10% range, which we talk about as a target. And there are different reasons for these indicators being ragged as red. The 5 to 10% target is actually something that the government released as sort of best practice, if you like. You know, they're saying that would be the best practice in terms of maintaining that rate of vacancy. So I think, to come to your point about does this mean we're just going to have to ask schools to reduce numbers? To a previous incarnation of this scrutiny group last December, I think it was, we brought our pupil place planning strategy, and I'm just wondering whether it would be something that would be helpful to bring an update on it at a future meeting. Because in that place planning strategy, we talked about the fact that we are experiencing a drop in our primary school pupils. This is not just us in Merton, it is across London. And it is there is a mixture there of factors, but primarily influenced by COVID and families moving out of London, with some parents feeling that they're able to work more from home, and also partly affected by Brexit. So to manage this situation, yes, we are looking very carefully at current and projected numbers in our primary schools. And we want to be able to work with our primary schools to help them to manage this drop, because as you can imagine, if you have, for example, a 2 form school where to be full you've got 60 children, if you have starting to have numbers in sort of the high 30s or even the mid 40s, that results in a significant drop in income for the school, but they've got to still employ 2 teachers for those class sizes, because in infant classes you cannot have classes bigger than 30. So we have got to help them to manage this. Some schools have taken the decision to reduce their PAN, and in the report that we brought last December, over the past 5-6 years, a number of schools have reduced their PAN, and we will continue to monitor this. We'll just have to continue to monitor the numbers overall, and where it is particularly impacting on certain schools and certain parts of the borough.
Councillor Hall, your follow-up question.
Thank you. My question is about item 19, the number of in-house foster carers recruited. At the last meeting, I asked whether exit interviews were conducted with foster carers who were leaving the service, and I was told that yes, there were. Now, what I should have done at the time, what I wanted to do, but I don't think we were allowed follow-up questions at the time, was to say, well, you know, could you tell us why people are leaving as foster carers? Because that's really important to structure how we try to recruit more. So I wanted to ask if we could have a report on exit interviews, and whether we could also find out exactly how many children are affected by the lack of foster carers, how long are they having to wait for placements, and what alternatives can be found to the situation. So yeah, really it's a very difficult situation, and it's not helped now by the cost of living crisis and it could well suppress numbers of new foster carers coming into the service because, you know, the additional costs of having another child in the house are significant. That's it. Thank you.
Before we move on to Councillor Kirby for her question, just to add to what Councillor Hall has said, we do have a corporate parenting scrutiny evening coming up as well, where the situation that we're in with recruiting foster carers will feature heavily in that. But that's not to say that you shouldn't get an answer to your questions now, but that is also coming up as well, because as you said, it is a really important issue, and it's an indicator that is concerning as well. So I just wanted to add that to your point. And now, Councillor Kirby, your question.
At last. Yeah, mine's on 19 as well. Just a bit of background because in I'm just trying to think when it was. When we came 1990 to 97, I was chair of social services, and we had 5 children's homes at that time. And one of the things that was very obvious to me on visiting the children's homes was how unhappy the managers were about the situation for children, the stigma they felt when they went to school, the changeover of staff, that lack of continuity. And we took a decision to move away from children's home. We closed all 5 and we moved to foster care. And we had professional foster carers as well. So I'm quite interested to see whether we do refer children to children's homes still outside of the borough. I'd like to know what the Mockingbird model is. And I think we do place a lot of children in foster care, and I think that's partly because we don't have children's homes. And so I'm quite pleased about that. I think it's going to be a whole range of issues, isn't it, as to why we're losing foster carers, really. But I think that model is one that we should be proud of, really. But it would be interesting to know what other boroughs did and whether these homes still exist.
Thank you, councillors. I mean, I think the detail behind exit interviews, Councillor Hall, very happy for. I don't know how well we capture systematically exit interviews as opposed to speaking to foster carers, and there are a range of reasons. Some foster carers are recruited because they're friends and family carers, so they are very specifically recruited as foster carers to look after a specific child or a group of children belonging to their extended family, for instance. So actually, when those children go on to become adults and no longer need to be looked after by us, they automatically, their role as foster carers automatically comes to an end, unless they choose to come back and look after other children, which is usually unlikely. There are some foster carers that we have to manage out because they are unable to maintain a satisfactory level of performance in their duties in supporting us as corporate parents. And of course, others may leave for other reasons, such as receiving a better payment from private organizations like independent fostering agencies, or choosing to leave the profession because it is so problematic and so complicated and quite difficult for a lot of families to cope with. So I'll find out how well and to what extent we capture the breakdown of leavers and their reasons behind them. And as Councillor Queeser said, the chair said, you know, perhaps we can bring that back as part of the corporate parenting scrutiny in the future. With regards to the question with regards to children affected and the lack of placements, to reassure members, there are no children that are waiting placements. If they do require foster care, we will source the foster placements. We certainly wouldn't leave them in any dangerous situations or safeguarding risks to continue. We will search foster placements outside of the borough, or I refer to them as outside of the borough, but independent fostering agencies. And some of our children have been in very successfully in independent foster care and they've become long-term foster care arrangements with very loving homes. So it's not to say that they're not offering the same, if not better care sometimes to our in-house foster carers. So as an alternative to in-house foster placements, we do have independent fostering agencies, and in some rare occasions, we do use residential homes for children. But you're absolutely right, Councillor, they're not in-house. We don't have in-house residential homes. And there are a range of reasons why we don't believe we currently have a need for a residential home, but there are some individual nuanced needs due to high complexities for children that have required us to source specific and specialist placement provisions outside of the borough. With regards to Mockingbird, again, that probably will come to corporate parenting scrutiny, but effectively it's a model where we have a home hub carer who is a highly trained foster carer who doesn't look after children directly themselves, but looks after a cluster of foster carers and offers a respite and a place for all the others to come together with the children, sometimes without the children, just to add to their training and development and effectively just some support, peer support from one another. And that has been really successful to the extent that we're looking to introduce a second cluster in next year, but we can provide more in detail on the Mockingbird program as part of the scrutiny.
Thank you for those responses. And in terms of next steps, I think this is certainly an area that members would want to follow up in greater detail in our corporate parenting scrutiny meeting. I've just looked at the diary with Stella, and that's not until later in the scrutiny year. But if members feel that it's something that we need to bring forward and have at an earlier meeting, then that is something that we can follow up after this meeting as well. So there was a question from Councillor Hayes. And any other questions before we wrap up this section? And a question from Councillor MacArthur. Anyone else? Anyone online? Okay, we'll have those two questions and then we'll move on with the agenda. Councillor Hayes.
Right, thanks for bringing me in, Chair. Is there a framework for foster care, either that's London-wide or national in terms of like that's not mate and Pacific, so you know that we don't design it ourselves. I'm sure I imagine there is, but I just wanted to, is there some kind of framework that covers all councils?
And Councillor MacArthur, your question.
Sorry, I've just got two quick ones. The first one is in reference to number 22, which is the percentage total of 0 to 5-year-old from areas of deprivation whose families are accessing the Children's Service Centre services, and the target is 55%. Now, I completely understand why during COVID the percentage was very low. It's now up to 39%, but you're saying that there is a full face-to-face offer now, and you're thinking you should see the numbers beginning to rise again over the next few years. That seems quite a long time to try and get back up to where you were before and what you're aiming for. And I'm just wondered, why do you think it's going to take the next few years, and what are you doing to try and encourage people to use the services? And sorry, just very quickly, number 13, with regard to the target of taking to complete care proceedings in 26 weeks, and it's up to 52 at the moment. Now, I know that's it's a year, and that seems an incredibly long time. I know there are problems with the court services, and that obviously is causing problems, but what are things that you can do in your control to try and speed up that process? Thank you.
I'll hand over to officers for answers.
If I can pick up the first and last, and I'll refer to Elizabeth for the second question. So with regards to the first question about a national or London-wide framework for foster carers, Councillor, so there are fostering regulations that are written in statute around expectations around the way in which foster carers are recruited, their training expectations, and the ways in which their ongoing sort of development is reviewed to ensure that they are meeting a certain standard. I hope that that's answered your question, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And with regards to the last question, court proceedings, that is absolutely quite problematic. And I was just last week or earlier this week speaking to the court's advisory director, and some of this absolutely is related to the challenges and timescales within court. I'm informed that there is a high vacancy rates for district judges, and there is a problem around some of the cases that couldn't conclude during the pandemic, taking their time to conclude now. The 52-week timescale that's currently demonstrated is those cases that have concluded in this last quarter, so started a year ago, and some of them started during the back end of the pandemic. And again, when you have one or two quite problematic cases which have led to repeat presentations to court, more challenges, requirements for additional expert assessments, often as a result of the defense trying to bolster their argument against the position of the local authority, that does tend to then cause delays. And that unfortunately isn't within local authority control. That is the power is available to the judge in those situations to weigh up whether or not they're satisfied with the evidence that's put in front of them. We review the tracker on a weekly, monthly basis. We liaise with our court advisory service on a monthly basis. And one of the ways in which the things that we're doing is early planning. So at the point when we're thinking we need to present the matter to court, we're having discussions with our legal services around the right assessments that are needed. But as I said, once the matter enters into the court arena, it becomes very difficult to sustain the same position that we had at the start when we were planning the ways in which we were going to go ahead, especially because, you know, there are people fighting for their children. So you can understand they will try their level best to get all the evidence they possibly can. And sometimes that delays matters in court. I hope that's answered your question, Councillor.
So in response to the question about the children's service, children's centres and our most deprived families accessing them, I think just to note again, which I'm sure you have seen, but this is a cumulative figure. So to look at our 39%, that's in comparison with 12% this time last year. So we've already seen that that rise. I think it's a good challenge. You know, are we looking over years, or actually should we be looking at a shorter time scale? Certainly we want to be seeing that 39% consistently to rise over the quarters of the coming year. What we're doing to encourage families to access them, firstly, is to make sure that the offer is the best offer it can be. And we have an excellent team working in our children's centres where we are constantly looking at the range of programmes that we've got on offer. Are these things that are going to be attractive to families, as well as the environment themselves being somewhere where families want to go. Our children's centres are situated in some of the most deprived areas of the borough. So they are, again, just in terms of trying to make sure that we are getting those children in its geographical location. And I think the third thing I would say is that we've got a very exciting new project, which is in its very early stages, called Insights to Intervention, which is around bringing together data sets from across the council, and then hopefully bringing in partner data as well, which will enable us to look at universal credit uptake and cross-referencing some of that data, so that we are then able to think better about how we are targeting families.
Quickly, I realise obviously the lower figures are during COVID. Was it at 55% before COVID in terms of access?
I would have to go back and check. It was because I've been in this role a year, so so I would need to go back and check.
Okay, I think those are all the questions for this section. And so we'll conclude this agenda item here. Thank you very much, members, for your questions, and officers for your responses. Diraj, if you'd like to excuse yourself now, that is absolutely fine. Thank you so much for your time. Next on the agenda, we're going to look at the progress that's been made with the written statement of action that emerged from the 2019 inspection by Ofsted and the Care Quality Commission, which identified 3 areas regarding our special educational needs and disability strategy that needed to be addressed. And so for this agenda item, I will hand over to Elizabeth to provide us with a quick overview before we then launch into questions. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so a very quick overview. As you say, this arose from our 2019 inspection, which was undertaken by Ofsted and the Care Quality Commission. It's worth pointing out that this is an inspection of a local area, so it's not just an inspection of the local authority within the council. It's also an inspection of the way that our health partners are functioning and how we work in partnership. We had those 3 areas for development, and the report essentially talks about the progress that we have made against each of those 3 areas. We have done a lot of work together, and I would want to highlight in particular the partnership working that has strengthened significantly over the course of the past 3 years between local authority and health partners. We had actually we have regular updates with the DFE that when they ask us about how well we're doing with this, and we actually had our most recent meeting with the DFE yesterday. And in that meeting, they commented very favourably on the range of health partners that were in the room, contributing to updates about progress against each of these areas. So the partnership working strengthened, the work that has gone into training the workforce, again, not just in the council, but across the partnership in terms of the quality of professional advice, contributing to EHCPs, and the work that has been put in to improve the timeliness of our plans again, so increasing our capacity. But audits showing a significant improvement in terms of the quality of our plans. And the third point, to bring out that we are always seeking the feedback from parents and carers, and very importantly, young people themselves, to understand how they are experiencing the support that they receive around for their special educational need and disability. We are expecting inspection imminently. We will be waiting by the phone on Monday morning. Every Monday morning at the moment, it's a possibility.
Thank you for that overview, and I think you've answered the question I had regarding this, because when I was going through this section of the report, and this is more of an overview question, I was seeing that the actions that have come out of this inspection have all been completed, and so I was curious as to, right, so what is the next step now that you've got through these actions? But is that next step waiting for Ofsted to come back and inspect the progress you've made and give their assessment of the progress you've made? Even though I'm aware you said you're having meetings with DFE and they're feeding into the work that you've done. So that was my question. Are there any other questions from members, whether online or in the chamber? None from online, so yeah. So in the chamber, Councillor Page and Councillor Pearce as well.
Yeah, I just had a question on that completion. You mentioned you have the meetings. Was it the sort of the DFE and NHS England who agreed the actions were all complete and agreed the sort of the action plan? Or was that something that was written in the local area and it's sort of self-assessed, or was that sort of independently signed off? Thank you.
And Councillor Pearce.
But number 2 of page 16 Is that right? No, I'm on the wrong thing then, aren't I? Yeah, I'll ask it later.
Okay, I'll hand over for the answer.
Thank you, Chair. So next steps, no, it's not awaiting inspection. Because actually, if we were to just sit around and wait for inspection, we could be wasting a lot of time. And I think what we would want to say is that the actions that we're taking as part of the written statement of action are sitting within our broader SEND strategy. So we're busy getting on with the actions that are in our SEND strategy, some of which are associated with a safety valve, some of which are associated with a strategy which we've had in place since 2020. So we're continuing to strive and move forward. Ofsted identified these three key things, but we've got to keep moving forward. Sorry, that's a fairly blunt answer. In a way, yes, we are waiting for inspection, and we're wanting to constantly look at what we're doing there, because we've got to maintain that performance to see. But we're just constantly trying to look forward and beyond just the three things that Ofsted wanted us to look at. In terms of the completion, and was that self-assessed or agreed by the NHS or DfE, on the basis of the evidence that we presented to them, they can see some evidence of that completion, but essentially it is self-assessed, and that's what and so what re-inspection will do is it will examine the evidence base that we will be putting forward. And through conversations with parents and young people again, to see, does that evidence stack up?
Councillor Pearce, do you remember your question or? All right. So if there are no further questions on this area, then I will hand over to Cabinet Member Kenny to give her verbal report on her recent priorities, and then take any questions from members. And I've allocated you 5 minutes, Cabinet Member.
Thank you, Chair, and I hope to take less than 5 minutes. First of all, my overriding aim is to work closely and effectively with the officers to achieve a very high standard of education for every child in Merton. And I have to say, although Councillor Kenny and Councillor Quasi have already said it, I am very impressed with the commitment, dedication, professionalism and determination to do the very best for our children. And so far, I can only thank you for everything you do. I think we are so lucky to have you in Merton. You are really committed and, will follow up and advise me on anything I ask. And I'm proud to represent such a professional team, because that's how I see myself really, although in meetings we do question as well. My priorities, they're wide ones, and they will, as I work more closely with the officers, reduce, but it is to have more children being educated, more children who live in Merton being educated in Merton. And that is an overriding aim, and there's very many small steps that are already in process going through the system to achieve this. And I could go into detail with the ARPs and the opening of schools and the application for another special school, the opening of Watley Avenue. And it really does cut down on our transport costs, which are extremely expensive. And all the time the officers have to remember that you've got to take into account parental choice. So that has to be worked on. And I think Merton is certainly working to build that reputation. My second is to carefully reduce the EHCPs. And I would say I'd be proud of the work that officers, schools, and everyone involved with the process has gone through to provide for our children. And that is the overriding priority, to provide for our children. But it's to look at ways, and there are processes going through, to reduce this cost, because it is taxpayers' money, ratepayers' money. and we have to be as efficient and as careful as we can. But the priority is the education of the children. And schools have stated that they're seeing a growing number of children entering the nursery with complex needs. And those children deserve the very best we can offer to them. And one of the things that will help both my first two statements is to support the development of the ARPS, the additional resource provision that's going on. And it's great to see Merton have worked to double the size of two of our primary schools with their places and got a new school on board who volunteered to develop an ARP in their base. And I think this is excellent. The schools are seeing the value of it and know they're supported by the officers to do this. So, and I think it's for Merton to provide that specialist support in schools, as Elizabeth's already stated, and I want to support that. But again, I want to reiterate, I think we're very lucky, very fortunate to have a great team leading our educational system, and I'd like to publicly thank you. I'm happy to, I hope that was under 5 minutes, 4 minutes.
It was under 5 minutes. And so thank you very much for that. You are welcome back anytime. And also, I'm glad that you brought up the additional provision resource in our existing schools. The ward I represent has benefited from that additional resource, speaking specifically of Cranmer and Melrose school, and so I'm glad that you brought that up. I think it's a good way to manage the reduction of EHCPs. Now I'll hand over to members for any questions to the cabinet member. Okay, one question from Councillor Page. Go for it.
I'm not quite sure whether you're the right person to ask this question of. It was just, there was a report in the newspaper around 15 parents being mistakenly convicted of serious criminal convictions when the intention of the council had been to request prosecution for a lesser charge of truancy, and it was sort of in the Evening Standard, and I think it's been picked up in other outlets already. My understanding of the story is it was the courts who sort of made the error, but of course these are people who live in Merton, and it's through our sort of school system. So I was wondering if we could have a bit of an update on that, or an explanation of what had gone on and what the council was doing to sort of remediate that.
If I could just say that Merton has to monitor truancy, and there's a small minority who have huge ones, but I think if Elizabeth could answer in better detail than I can.
And I think probably what I'm going to say, Councillor, is we need to find some more information for you about that and dig a little bit deeper.
Any other questions? Okay, then we will wrap up this section by again thanking Councillor Kenny for her time. I also know that during the summer, at the end of the summer, you attended some school sort of exam results days as well, and the results have been generally quite positive in the borough as well. And so that's something to celebrate and highlight as well, the achievements of our children. So that brings me to the last agenda item, and we're still on track to keep this meeting within the 2 hours. I tried to keep all of these meetings, and so thank you members for cooperating with that while still having the time to ask quite inquisitive questions. So the last agenda item is just to update members on the work programme and to get any feedback or questions regarding this update. So I've only got two key updates. The first one is regarding our task group on the youth offer. So we had our first meeting, effectively the launch, yesterday, which was attended by myself, Councillor MacArthur, and also Councillor Austin. And during that meeting, we selected Councillor Austin as the chair of that task group just through consensus. So I hope members are also pleased with that decision. And we had a briefing from the Education and Inclusive Services because the focus of this task force is around reviewing whether we offer a sufficient youth offer to our young people. And so in terms of next steps, the chair, working alongside other members of that task group, are going to refine the focus of that task group to an area where we know we can do a genuine investigation and come up with recommendations, if necessary, that have a chance of being approved by the panel and also going to cabinet as well, and influencing policy and making sure that our young people have a sufficient offer across the borough. So we will keep you updated on that task group. The second update is regarding an initiative that came to mind during my my summer holidays. And I promise this is not an excuse for me to talk about my summer. It is actually relevant, I promise. So during the summer, I had the privilege of taking part in a leadership exchange program with the US State Department. And as part of that program, we got to tour states in America and look at initiatives focused around youth empowerment and civic engagement. And whilst visiting some local authorities in Florida and in Wisconsin, I came across quite good examples of youth in governance initiatives where I saw young people just as passionate, just as engaged, and just as affected by local government policies as much as our young people here. I saw them taking part in scrutiny work with those local authorities. And so it got me thinking, do we perhaps need to look at having a similar model here? Because I don't know how other members feel, but it doesn't sit right with me to scrutinize services for and about young people without those who are actually affected by those services having a voice. And I know this is something that other committees are looking at as well, specifically Healthier Communities panel. And so I wanted to bring that back to members to get your thoughts on the idea, and also to gauge whether this is an area that you want to move forward on in order to make our panel more inclusive, and also strengthen our scrutiny function as well, by including those who are impacted by the services we scrutinize. But just to be clear, no decisions have been made, because I think these need to be made with the whole panel, not just unilaterally. So no decisions have been made. And if tonight you do agree that this is an area you want to move forward on, then the next step will be to go away and reflect on how best to incorporate that youth voice in scrutiny. And I welcome any members here who are interested to take part in that process. And so with that said, I'm going to open the floor for any thoughts, and then we'll end with hopefully an agreement. Councillor Butcher.
Thank you, Chair. I very much support the idea, and although I said in my maiden speech I was the youngest councillor, I was corrected. I am in fact the second youngest councillor. But even then, I've been out of secondary education for 8 years. So although my experience as a youth, as it were, is now somewhat outdated. And I think there is no better experience than first-hand experience. And I think it would be a great idea to include more people who are actually affected by what we discuss here to get their opinions and views on it. Logistically, there's going to be a lot to work out on this. I think going forward, it may well be best to establish something like a task group or something to determine what form this would take. But I am very much in support of the idea, and I think it's something we should press ahead with.
Thank you, Councillor Butcher, for that contribution. And I think the initiative would have been in trouble if one of our youngest members wasn't in support of it. So I'm glad you're in support of it. And I won't tell you how long I've been out of secondary or primary education. Councillor Hayes had his hand up first, so we'll go to Councillor Hayes and then to Councillor Kirby. Councillor Hayes.
I got it. Yeah, okay. Yeah, as a former young socialist from a million years ago, I think it sounds like the outline or the beginnings of the outline of a good idea, Chair. But I think what we need to do, and it's just top of the head type stuff, I think we need to define what the constituency is because I'm never clear when we talk about children and young people, what the demographic of that constituency, i.e. in terms of the number of young people in Maine, what the age range is, and maybe there's a document that tells you that, but I'm never quite clear what we're talking about. So before we move forward on it, I would like a document that tells you the numbers of young people that we're talking about, and ranges and that. Then the demographics, what's the makeup of that particular constituency, so to speak. And then maybe we have, and I can't think of a better term than this, but if there's some way of having some kind of blind survey of what they think, rather than talking to people. I'm not against talking to people one-to-one, but, when adults talk to young people, and we try to use all the jive words and everything, it never quite works. So, you need some kind, and obviously that's a little bit of work, but I think it's a good idea. And I think the thing is, in terms of youth initiatives and all these kind of endeavors, whether that be in political parties or civil society, it does work. There's clear evidence, dare I say, a former young Liberal ended up being a head of research when I was at CW, and that was Peter Hain. For anyone remember him, he used to be a Liberal. Mind you, then so did Liz Truss, but we won't go there on that one. So I think it's a good idea. Sounds good. Is there any chance of us getting any documentation on your experiences, Arma? Okay, that's fine. So initial reaction is good idea, but we need to know what we're talking about, who we're talking to, and some kind of feedback from whether that be polling or sampling as to what the kind of mindset is in the borough of young people. Thanks.
Before I go to Councillor Kirby for a contribution, before then going back to officers, I just want to say, yeah, I completely agree with the points you've raised, Councillor Hayes. It is important that we consider what exactly is the demographic that we're talking about, because the young people that then feed into scrutiny, we want them to be representative of the borough, and those demographics will be very important for that. And we also want this to be meaningful and not something that's simply tokenistic. And so when we're looking at the structure of their input to scrutiny, it needs to be in a way that they feel briefed, trained, and confident contributing to scrutiny, and not simply sitting in the background and watching us have our regular proceedings. So that's something that also needs to be looked at as well. And also appreciated you sharing your personal experiences as well. Now, Councillor Kirby, and then we'll hand over to officers for any input. And if there's anyone else that wants to comment on this, go for it, Councillor Kirby.
Again, it's gone on. think if they were to come to a scrutiny panel, they'd be bored out their faces, quite frankly. And I don't mean that unkindly, but I just think, you know, we're used to this kind of thing, but we do have a youth parliament. And I think that could be the channel through which, because what they would be then doing is actually taking issues that we are wanting to discuss that are relevant to them, asking for their feedback through youth parliament and then feeding that back to us. So I think they wouldn't have to sit through scrutiny panels, but they could actually sit through their own parliament and enjoy their own conversations and make recommendations. But it's there, that parliament's there. And I think it would be good for them to know that we value that parliament, because I don't know, I mean, it's a long time since I've been involved in anything like the youth parliament, but you know, you need to have a regular sort of intake of good information coming to you, and we could be providing that from each, not just this panel, but the other panels as well, because as you said, healthier communities, that affects young people as well. Sustainability, certainly they would be really on the case for that. So, you know, there's a channel, we need to do some research on that. And, but I think it's, you know, it's good to get young people involved.
Yes, I agree. We do need to look at what already exists, and that was part of what I looked at before I thought to present this to you, because I wanted to see does something like this already exist, because we don't want to replicate what already exists. And while we do have other channels where young people feel they can express their opinions, I personally don't feel that I feel they can contribute more. And from my experience of being involved in youth and governance initiatives, I know that there was always this block of we're talking to ourselves, but then adults don't get to hear our thoughts and we're not really influencing those platforms as well. Councillor MacArthur.
Thank you. Yes, I tend to agree with Councillor Kirby. I think it's a good idea, but I think maybe having their own youth parliament and feeding into us is a better idea. But I think I'd have to know more about how you wanted it to work, how many people you'd want to bring in, how it would be representative. I think it's a really interesting idea, but I think I'd need to know more about it going forward before I could say one way or the other.
Yes.
Yes, this comes, and I agree with Linda. There used to be one of these panels where councillors met with representatives of a few of the senior schools, even the primary schools. And I actually took over for a year as the chair, and you could see it was a disaster because politicians, and I include myself in this, don't know when to stop talking. And what was happening was, if you had a 2-hour meeting, the youngsters will put in their 10 pennyworth, if you like, at the beginning, and we'd have 5 or 10, and then it would be the politicians just talking at them. And the committee just died because the kids just didn't want to come. So I think we've got to be a bit more constructive in how we put that together.
Yes, Councillor Butcher.
I think Councillor Kirby raised a good point. Perhaps we could start by inviting the Merton member of the Youth Parliament to come and address the committee, or something similar to that. And I think in terms of like concrete proposals, again, I'd push for something like a task group to sort of go away and sort of come up with a solid proposal to put to the committee with your involvement, Chair, and see what we can come up with, because it's definitely something I want to pursue. I'd like to see more involvement from a member of Youth Parliament. I don't think we stop there. I think we go further with it. Thank you. Okay, if those are all the members contribute. Oh, sorry, we've got
Una who'd like to contribute online. Please unmute yourself and offer your contribution.
Yes, with respect, I just want to say that I think it's an excellent idea, but as the councillor subsequently said, you know, you've got youth parliament, but you've also got school councils, you've got all sorts of various systems kind of in place, working very well, even from primary school upwards. But I just want to remind you about those minutes that you got from the work with young people on race and discrimination and their levels of comfort and otherwise with the police, and just encourage you to be creative about the way in which you may be seeking to encourage young people to give their voice and to share with you, because I think that way you will get a more engaged and indeed engaging voice of young people, rather than it being just the public speakers, typical public speakers. You might want to look for different ways of enabling people to speak in inverted commas. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that contribution, Una. And a lot of what I'm getting from members is we do need to go away and think a bit more about what the structure we want to give this initiative and what the most appropriate, most effective forum will be for this. And that should form part of our next steps. Before I say any more, I can see Councillor Hayes is itching to say something. So I'll let him speak first before I wrap up in case it influences what I'm about to say.
Okay, I've got it. Yeah, you know, there's a slight negativity, to be honest with you, by some of the contributions, and I think it's an excellent idea. But I just want to talk about a real world experience. And that is, I won't mention the school, but you probably all know it was, where there was an instance regarding something that happened on a bus, and it based on the racism, right? I see, and I won't mention the school, it's probably the wisest thing not to do. But I think sometimes when we talk about youth issues, we can't help ourselves, but we tend to be a bit, you know, happy clappy when we talk about youth issues. And there was a real world incident that you know, had some kind of involvement in. You can guess what happened. The things that we aren't picking up about in the schools, how kids are sometimes treated in real life incidences, that they're the kind of things I want to get out of listening to the people of the borough. Not just there should be more youth clubs, and we should have more sarsaparilla in our youth clubs and all that kind of talk you sometimes get when you talk about young kids. There's issues around things like gangs as well, you know, and the development of gangs and how gangs, although I think, to be honest, gangs is a bit of an overused term in the UK, you know, because it clicks into the American, the USA experience. So I want to reinforce the congratulations to you for coming up with this idea. Yes, it needs shape. Yes, we need to know what we're trying to get out of it, but I want to get out of it real live issues, not just more youth clubs, please, or more sarsaparilla at our functions or whatever, you know, for those that remember sarsaparilla. So, you know, I'm trying to congratulate you, Sama, Chair. I think you know, it's a good initiative, and I think we need to push on with it, getting the shape of it, what it's about, what we want to get out of it. And it doesn't have to involve people just listening to us ramble on, but it is about us picking up things that we don't know about because we're old. You know, it's simple as that, in my opinion. So sorry to have a bit of a rant, but you know, I do think it's a great initiative.
It was a supportive rant, and so I don't mind it. Cool. So to wrap up the discussion, firstly, thanks to all members who are supportive of this idea going forward in some form. And I absolutely hear the concerns that some members have also raised as well with regards to the structure and effectiveness and whether this is the right forum for youth input. I hear your thoughts on that. And so if members agree in terms of next steps, I can go away and think more about this and have discussions with the Youth and Education and Inclusion team, because they manage all of our youth initiatives and have access to the young people who are already involved in council initiatives. And so there'll be a first port of call. And what we can do is compile a report on suggestions for how this can move forward to bring to the next scrutiny panel. And should we want to proceed with one of those models, we can then look at actioning that model. And with these next steps as well, to anyone in this chamber and online as well, if you'd like to be involved in shaping the next steps, please do reach out to me after tonight, and I can rope you into discussions to move this initiative ahead, because I know that everyone here values the voice of young people. We just want it to be meaningful and actually enhance scrutiny and not simply be tokenistic and unnecessary. So are we in agreement on those next steps? Brilliant. Thank you. And so with that, I'll just... Yes, Councillor Kirby.
I did raise an issue right at the beginning when we were at the initial session about young girls self-harming and also eating disorders. And I offered to run a program around that myself. So what I'd like to do is to actually engage with schools and also find out what best practice there is going on. But there is a dreadful epidemic of self-harming and certainly eating disorders. It's shocking, and it would be good to know how young people in our borough are affected by this, gather information. And I'm not asking officers to spend any of the time, because I think we've probably got enough to do. But it would be interesting to know if there are any other people who would be interested in taking part in that as well, and I'll happily take it on.
Thank you for flagging that again, Councillor Kirby. And I commend you for raising that issue, because it is a serious concern, especially since this panel has looked into mental health as one of the task group topics in the past as well. It's an area that I know people are still concerned about. And actually, we do have an item coming up in a later CYP in February. We have an agenda item that's around the mental health and well-being of children and young people. So this might be an area where you can also feedback the work that you're doing to look into this issue. And also in following meetings as well, we will end by reviewing progress on the work program as well. And so if there is a meeting where you want to feedback the work that you've done in this area, that I'm sure panel members will want to hear that. Yes, you can, Stella. Have you been itching to talk this whole time? Yes, so sorry for hogging the microphone. Go for it, Stella.
Chair, I just wanted to say thank you to Councillor Kirby, because we do have a mechanism where we encourage councillors to do their own reviews and report back to the panel with the agreement of the chair of the panel. so I can sort of support you where I can. But usually, well, we haven't done many of them, but we do encourage it if councillors are interested.
Know that the panel are happy for me to go ahead with that because I'll be doing it in the name of the panel. So when I write, that's what I will be saying on behalf of the Children and Young People's Scrutiny panel. I am asking these questions, but it would be good to know if anyone else is interested in taking part in this.
So I do have a few hands raised. I don't know if it's people who want to speak in support of your research, but I assume so. So I saw Councillor Butcher's hand go up first and then Councillor McCarthy.
Yes, I just wanted to say it's brilliant that you're putting this forward, Councillor Kirby. Full admiration, full support, and I propose that the whole panel proposes to support Councillor Kirby in her efforts.
And also, just to clarify, this isn't a new sort of area of scrutiny if I just come out of nowhere. It is something that Councillor Kirby mentioned when we put together the work programme. So it is part of the agreed work programme, just to clarify, it's not just an initiative that's come out of thin air. Councillor MacArthur.
Thank you. Yes, I also agree. Commend you for that, and I'll be willing to help in any way that I could.
Councillor Hall, did you want to say something? Okay. Brilliant. Okay, so we will conclude the discussion about the work programme there, and we're not that over time as well, and so I'm not gonna keep you any longer. Just to say thank you to all the panel members for your contributions and for being so thorough with your questions as well. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground, and I'm very pleased with how this meeting's gone. And of course, thank you to all the officers for their candid responses. And congratulations again, Maisie, on your new position. And thank you, Cabinet Member Kenny, for your verbal update as well. And as always, Stella, thank you for all that you do to keep this this panel going. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, or what's left of your evening, and see you next time. Get home safely.